Never underestimate the power of
Alan! Welcome to week 2 of Teaching Teemo Tuesday. The feedback that I received from last week was very good. The main one being, I think that you guys want more specific stuff and more clips. That takes more time for me, but I will put more attention towards finding clips when I watch my own YouTube videos so that I can demonstrate some concept later on after a week. We can maybe do something like a weekly recap where out of the last 6 videos that I uploaded, I go through some special moments that you guys might have not noticed. I literally just made that up, but that actually sounds like a cool thing. That I show a special moment from each video that I uploaded in the week. That's a good idea. Yeah, let's do that next week. So, in today's week, I very often got the question on YouTube and on Reddit, everywhere else, that you guys want to know what should you do in the mid game. So today I prepared a presentation on that. And I swear, after this, after this slide, everything will be fine again. So for this slide, I will turn off this really quickly. So last week we talked about the problem that Teemo has in the mid game, where for a very long time you are stuck on level 12 to 15 and you're not that strong in that time period, so you tend to win fewer games there. And if the game ends, then usually it's because in the mid game you're pretty weak. What do we do about that? Last time I mentioned a certain mindset that you want to have. You want to push yourself far enough ahead that yourself being weak in the mid game doesn't matter. So I hinted at it last time. It sounds kind of Captain Obvious, but again, if you're level 15, but they're level 12, it doesn't matter that you're technically weak in the mid game. If you're ahead, you're ahead. So your mid game weakness doesn't matter. The question is just, how do we get far enough ahead in XP and in gold that we can win in the mid game? So those are our goals. We want to somehow get XP. Of course, if you want to win, you want to get ahead. But I want to show you how you can get ahead in XP. You can get ahead in gold in the mid game so that you can choose a fight that is good for you. For that, I need to establish that side lanes give you a lot of gold. A shit ton of gold. You get 250 gold when you kill the outer tower. You get 550 gold when you kill the inner tower, plus you get global gold as well. So you see, also you get 600 gold. That is so much. That is 2 kills. Also, if you're winning lane and you kill the first tower of the game, you get 150 gold. But even more, above all of that, you get 875 gold if you get 5 plates. That is so much. That is absurd. If you kill the first tower and get all plates, you get 1.2k gold. That is so much. So if you win the lane, if you go to the side lane, just from the towers and everything else, you will get far more gold than you will get on other sides. So just keep in mind, side lanes have a lot of gold for you to collect. Being on a side lane also allows you to get solo experience. That means you don't share gold with anyone else. And it allows you to take enemy jungle camps. This is an example of a game where I'm level 18 when the second highest level, also a solo laner, Rumble, is level 15. And I'm up 50 CS on the next person, but 100 CS on the Rumble, for example. That allows me to be way ahead in items. And even though the Rumble, the Graves, was still allowed to have 220 CS, because I played the camps, the fights correctly, I got all of the camps, I took all of the CS. I was so far ahead that in the end I couldn't do anything. So if you think about it, if I didn't push myself far enough ahead, I would have also been level 15 here. And I would have still been in this sort of weak phase. But I pushed myself so far ahead that I never got into this weak phase. And we won this game pretty decisively. So, of course, I'll show you how you get to the spot. But I can already tell you I got to the spot by being in a side lane. By being only in a side lane. This is how I got all of my items earlier than the Graves. That's how I was able to push himself forward. That's how I was able to build a level lead. And that's how I was able to establish control over that game. Because a common theme in playing side lane is that you control everything that happens. Because you're the only one doing anything. When you join a team fight, your team has like 10 potential ways to fuck you over. In the top lane, only you can fuck yourself over in your team. So that's why if you want to have consistent gameplay, you go in the side lane, because there you can have consistent results. You also need to remember that as a top laner, you get more gold than mid laners. Mid laners just get less gold. Their cannon minions give them less gold, and their normal minions give them 1 less gold. Also, bot laners have to share XP, so they're always lower level. So top laners are uniquely positioned to be super egoistical and play super hard for the side lane to push themselves up super hard. I mean, that's the entire concept of split pushing, pretty much. And Teemo can be played as a split pusher. So, another benefit of being on the side lane, I'll show you how you do that soon enough, but it's that you are allowed to establish vision and decide when you want to take a 1v2. With Teemo, you have access to shrooms, which are basically free vision, right? So if you establish vision and you see the enemy coming to you because you're split pushing, you can first of all either pull attention towards you, or you can often 1v2. That depends heavily on the team comp, of course, but you can 1v2. This is, of course, an extreme example where we have a bunch of vision scattered around the jungle, but when you're split pushing, you can, control a whole quadrant of the map just by yourself. You can even often just in the lane push and play for 1v2. Teemo with Ignite and his blind can be very strong, and maybe next week I'll show you some examples of where I willingly did a 1v2. And I kind of did that last week, right? When I let Griffin engage onto me, I was ready to 1v2 there. And you shouldn't be that afraid to go for 1v2 as Teemo. That's one of the best ways that you can impact the game. So, another thing that I mentioned already, kind of, is on the side lane, you can take enemy jungle camps. And that is so massive. Because you get gold and XP that you normally wouldn't get. That's how I got level 18 in that example. While the enemy loses that gold and XP. And both of that is really nice, of course. You have to consider that if you take a Gromp and you get 80 gold, that's 80 gold that the enemy Z jungle didn't get. So by being in a side lane, by taking enemy jungle camps, you're influencing other roles even though you're being there by yourself. And because Teemo Poison deals... That song is far too dramatic. Because Teemo's E deals 200% damage to minions, Teemo is very good at taking enemy camps and you don't lose that much. So, to drill the mindset into you that you should have, in my opinion, in your elo, is that roaming is a lie invented by supports to convince top laners to leave their lane. There are exceptions, but you don't need to leave your lane that much. You will see me roam a bunch, but that's because very high elo works slightly differently. When you see me smurf, that is basically how I play the game. Of course, I kind of win my lane a lot when I smurf. That's kind of why I don't do it. But I still think like in low elo, you cannot trust anyone, so you should just play for yourself. And for that, I made a small meme. This is Blue Lock, where an anime about football where they want to train the most egotistical football players ever, who are only hyper-focused on scoring goals themselves. Well, that's what I want you to be as a Teemo. I want you to be the most egoistical fucker who only does stuff for himself to get side lane gold and XP. To push yourself forward, and then later on, you can do stuff. Later on, you can do stuff in group. For that, I've made a decision flowchart, and I once again forget that I would be blocking stuff. So, usually, if you want a group, it's pretty easy. First of all, you ask yourself, is the tier 2 tower in the top lane up? If it is up, you need... If it is or if it isn't up, you need to think, is there a soul point, a third dragon spawning? If the tower is up, and there's no third dragon, that means there's no pressure and you should always remain in the lane. Pretty much. You should be split pushing. If the third dragon is spawning, then it depends. Maybe you need to group. If the top lane tower is down, so you already took the other tier 2 tower, and there's no third dragon, then you should just go to the other side lane. So if you took the top lane tier 2, you should just go bot lane and take that tier 2. If there is a third dragon, then right, you got a super big advantage. You killed the tier 2 tower. You should be, you can definitely group to deny a soul point or to get a soul point. I'm still saying that you should be playing as egotistical as possible, but if there is a soul point and you have the opportunity to group, sometimes it is worth it. But to make it easier for you, you should just be thinking, okay, could there be a soul or not? So, how do you know if you can play super egotistical? If you can play only for yourself? Well, first of all, you need to consider the enemy team comp. Can they roam onto you? Because you can't really split push if you just die because everyone roams on you from 10 screens away. If you want to split push against an Ornn, well, good luck if the enemy Talon and Pyke can just jump on you as soon as the Ornn ults. Good luck. If they just roam onto you, then you can do it. So oftentimes I check, do they have a Bard? Do they have a Pyke? Do they have a Talon? Do they have the Zed? If they have that, it becomes a lot more difficult than if they, for example, have an Elise and luck support. Or for example, it's often scary to split push against the Xerath because the Xerath can just ult you from the mid lane, or against an Aurelion because he can just come from the base. In those team comps, I decide to group a lot more because I simply can't split push. I would die. So that might influence your decision. However, you can still try to split push because they're probably not going to play it ideally. If they play it ideally, they probably just roam onto you and kill you. But usually they are going to fuck up somehow. For example, if you know that they can roam onto you, just be prepared to run as soon as possible. Your goal is basically to just take up enemy attention and hope your team does something on the other side. You don't really have another win condition. It obviously helps if you get a bunch of movement speed. So if you have Phase Rush or Footwork or Swiftness boots or even Ghost, you can sometimes run Ghost, even though I don't really recommend it, just to run away. Then obviously, if you know that people are going to roam onto you, only start pushing the wave once you have secured deep vision. Deep vision means you first go into the enemy jungle to throw your shrooms in the jungle and get a bunch of vision. And only once you have full vision onto them are you gonna push. For example, if they don't necessarily have a roaming jungler, then you can just first push and then establish vision. But if against a Talon or something, you have to make sure that he doesn't jump onto you first. And also sometimes it's inevitable that you're gonna die. But for example, sometimes you want to split push so that the Talon jumps onto you and in exchange you get a third dragon or something. But yeah, that's what you would be doing if they have a bunch of roaming champions and you have to side lane and you want to side lane. Else you might just be forced to group in the mid game. Next. One thing that might influence your decision if you want to group or side lane is how much range they have. If they have a bunch of range, like for example, a very popular combo right now is Caitlyn and Lux and a Xerath, don't teamfight. Just split push. Like basically doesn't matter what you do. Doesn't matter what the position is. Like honestly, even if they have soul point, unless you're far ahead, like just don't group. You can't get to those targets, and as soon as you get hit by one spell, you just die. It's far more useful if you just split push, try to pull them apart. And it's way more useful if you keep Xerath on the side lane, like if he comes top lane to fight you, than if you and Xerath group, because Xerath is just always going to be more useful in a team fight. So if you see that they have very high range and that they are low mobility, just split push so that you can pull their team apart, and that's going to be a win condition. The thing is, League of Legends at the end of the day is a team game. So even though you're playing exclusively for yourself and you're being very egotistical, at the end of the day, very often, whether you win or lose will still depend on your team. So in the end, you have to be realistic and just say, okay, I can pull someone top lane, and maybe my team will do something good. Maybe I'm able to 1v2, but it's not guaranteed. It's just more likely that you will win. So, next thing to consider. Sometimes you have to consider if you can split push just based on how strong you are. Because let's imagine you're playing against a Yasuo. And the Yasuo has finished shield bow and you didn't. So he is on an item breakpoint. Well, very likely you don't want to be stuck on a side lane with him, right? Because he can just dash through the minions and engage on you. So potentially you would want him to first push in the wave, or you would like to group around an objective until you can get your item. Another caveat might be whether you have your Ignite up or not. Ignite is very often a big decider on whether you can get a kill. So here, I mean, there's split pushing, which is being on the side lane, and there's split pushing with actually attacking the tower. Here, I mean, you probably can't really attack the tower and play very aggressively if you don't have Ignite up, because, well, very likely they might be able to engage onto you and you're not gonna win the 1v1. In general, right, if you don't have your Ignite up, maybe be a bit more careful and just clear the minions, but don't necessarily go for fights, don't necessarily try to do a 1v2, don't necessarily try to take a tower. That's kind of what I mean. And also, of course, if you're at a heavy level disadvantage, then you might be unwilling to fight. However, split pushing is still good at the level disadvantage. So if you know that the enemy Aatrox is super strong and he can 1v9 a team fight, it's probably better if you go to the side lane and force him to match you. Because he's strong, you're useless, but you're keeping him in the same lane. If you can stop the super fat Aatrox from initiating on your team, well, that's a win for your team. So that's another thing that you might consider when you want to split push. Then, another thing that you can consider around split pushing. I will later on, in the next few weeks, give you a bunch of examples, but these are all things that you need to consider, or that I constantly actively consider when I split push and when I don't split push. Now, this is all, of course, very complicated, and it's hard to think of all of it, but that's kind of what differentiates a good player from a decent player from a good and a great player. Like, we have all of that in mind and then make a decision on how we want to play it. So this might be overwhelming at first, but if you break down every situation in its components, then it makes more sense. So you also have to consider the relative strength of the teams. So let's say you are strong, but your team is weak. You basically have two scenarios. Either you go for a split push because you want to 1v2 or 1v3 to win it. Because, again, if you have a weak team and you're grouping, probably you're gonna... well, it's always relative, right? If you're very strong and you're against a high range comp, like, for example, the Lux Caitlyn, you probably don't want to group because probably they can just hold you at bay and they can deny your whole advantage. You would rather force them to go through the jungle, walk through shrooms, and waste their time. However, if they have got a bunch of Hecarims, Siluses, etc., a bunch of heavy engage, and you are strong, you might actually want to group around dragons because your team might just get overrun. So especially against engaged team comps, grouping becomes better if you are strong because you know that they're gonna engage. So you know that you're gonna get numbers advantages. Or at the very least, not a number disadvantage. Now, if you are weak, but your team is strong, so if you fed like crazy and your team is strong, again, you have the option of keeping the Aatrox on the side lane, but that's not always possible. Oftentimes, again, with the flowchart, if the third dragon is up, then you just want to group. Because you don't want to say, aha, I might be 0-5, but I'm gonna play for myself and be on the side lane. Meanwhile, your team is in the 4v5 at the third dragon and they die, right? You would just fuck your team over. If you lost your lane, but the major objective is coming up, then you just group. Because at the end of the day, sometimes you just need to get carried. And that's how you make yourself the most carryable. Now, another thing that you need to consider. Of course, soul points are important. But sometimes you can... ignore that. So for example, if there is a soul on the left, so a good soul, like a Hextech Mountain Inferno or Ocean Dragon, and it's a third dragon, then you probably want to group more than if it was a Cloud or Chemtech Dragon. Cloud or Chemtech soul are pretty bad, and teams can get the soul and still lose. So if you see that there's a Cloud soul, you might be more inclined to just stay on the side lane and not group if your team is once again weak. Because split pushing is just way better. Now, I don't know how it is in low elo, but maybe this is worth to be said. You are gonna group for like the 4th dragon if you're level 16. That's a big caveat. But early souls, that's where that's kind of what we're discussing. So I don't know when Soul Dragon gets taken by in low elo, but your goal is to get level 16 as fast as possible to then start grouping and go for the soul and the baron and whatnot. I'm just talking about kind of early souls, you know, like 25-minute souls or something. 27-minute souls. But sometimes you can actually just give a soul because the soul is not so good. So there was a question from the other slides. If an objective isn't up, is it still good to split? So there's no objective up, there's no dragon up. You are weak, but the team is strong. Usually you don't group there. Because at that point, there's no objective up, there's nothing to fight around. You just hope that your team is strong and does their stuff. And you try to catch up, you know, in the side lane. You usually don't take fights, but when you're group and there's no objective while your team is strong, usually just nothing happens, you know. There's random ass fights, but it's not necessarily visible that, you know, you're gonna have a big impact. So yeah, you just get the XP, you know. The end goal is always to reach that level 16 mark. So if there's no objective up, you usually just don't group. So, but in general, even if you try to group, there are some people that come to a dragon 2 minutes before it spawns. That is completely useless. Usually, you only start going to dragon a minute before it spawns. But even then, you always want to go to a side lane and catch a minion wave with the shroom. So you want to kill and push as many waves as possible as you safely can before you base or go to the dragon. Because that way you get the best of both worlds, where maybe you can push 3 waves, go to the dragon, and by the time that the wave comes back... Here, I'll give you the fastest illustration in the West. So this is top lane, right? Before you go to the dragon, you push in all of the waves until you're at the tier 2, and then you move down to the dragon. Or you base and you move to the dragon. That's what I mean. Live illustration. Very often you can just get a wave, get a bit more gold, get a bit more CS. To get stronger. But again, this is the mid game. In the late game, as someone says in the chat correctly, once you're level 16 and whatnot, and you've got a bunch of shrooms that hit hard, you actually want to set up objectives. You want to set up the drakes. But in the mid game, usually you can still catch a wave. Again, like your major goal is to get to that level 16, to the late game mark. And I think it is more of a good habit to make sure to collect waves where you can, rather than a good habit of shrooming up objectives before you can. Because the thing is, you can shroom up an objective, and that objective fight still goes wrong and you lose. And then you lose the fight and you didn't get any camps. Meanwhile, if you make sure to always get the minions to get the camps, before you go to an objective, then even if that objective fight goes bad, you still have something, you know? Something to fall back on. Another thing to consider is that Baron is currently very weak, and Teemo has a lot of DPS if you go Nashers. So you can actually dual or triple take Baron at 20 very often. That, in my opinion, should win you like 50% of your games. 50% of your wins should just be you winning lane, killing the tier 2, and then taking Baron with your jungler and winning the game that way. Basically by yourself. The other 50% of the games, we can talk about it, but 50% of the games, you just take the Baron and you run the enemy team over. I think the Baron is just weak because of numbers and because the jungle smite in preseason is very broken and gives like 20% more damage to Baron. So you can definitely do a Baron quite often. There's actually an achievement with Eternals, which is called the early bird gets the worm. Maybe I can check it. This is my Smurf. I'm not gonna go on my main account. Where I'm like Grandmaster or Challenger, so like top 1000 and taking Barons before 21 minutes. Teemo has very high DPS with this E-Poison. And yeah, you can get a lot of Barons and just win most of your games that way. So, I wanted to give you some examples. Here, classical mid-game scenario. These are very simple examples. I want you guys to, if you see a mid-game scenario and you're like, why are you side lane? Why aren't you grouping? Please, under this video, send a link with a timestamp. And in the next few Teaching Teemo Tuesdays, I will go over those examples and give you my decision making, whether it was right or wrong. I want to give you some basic examples where, for example, here I can see that a Cloud Soul is spawning. We're decently strong. So even though I could be going down the side lane right now, Irelia is saying that she wants to go top lane. Why does she want to do that? I don't know if that's like too basic for most of you or if some of you guys aren't aware. But as Teemo, you don't have Ignite. You have Ignite, you don't have Teleport. So Irelia has Teleport. She can just teleport to the fight. So I'm gonna base and I'm gonna go to the side lane, but I'm gonna go to bot lane. So that I'm closer to the dragon that will spawn eventually. So that Irelia can TP the dragon. So with this example, I just want to show you that usually the person that has teleport is supposed to go to the opposite side of the objective. So if dragon is the major objective, then the teleport user should go top lane. If Baron is the major objective, then the Baron user should go bot lane. So here I'm basing to go bot lane because Irelia has TP. I just didn't know if this is something that all of you know. So here is an example. My team is super strong and I said just group, right? But honestly, at this point, my team is just doing random ass bullshit in the top lane in this screenshot. We're not gonna win the game right now. And now you might say, oh, my team is strong. Let me just follow them and they'll be fine. But honestly, at this point, I think it's way better that you bridge the gap between level 12 and 15. You go bot lane and you push this side lane out. Your team loses a lot of potential XP and gold if minions just die in the side lane. So I know they're gonna collect stuff in the top lane and mid lane. So it just makes sense for me to be bot lane and get like 3 or 4 waves. Maybe once I'm at the tier 2 bot lane, I'm gonna group. But just because my team is strong and I should be supporting them, nah. I wanna keep getting items, I wanna get level 16. I'm gonna ignore whatever the fuck they're doing top lane and I'm gonna be bot lane here. Because no major objective is up, no major objective is spawning. So let me just stay bot lane. This is an example where the teams are about even, but the enemy team, I mean, we're kind of ahead. The enemy team has 2 dragons, so they might get Infernal Soul, and with Seraphine Karma, they might actually scale and win the game here. Now, I had the option to stay in the top lane stay in the top lane and go for the tier 2. But that would be a bad decision. What I instead did is I pushed in all of the waves so that I can get all of the XP and CS possible. Which is why, by the way, I'm 14 to level 11. I never grouped before this moment. But now that the third dragon is about to spawn, so they might get a soul point, and I already pushed this in, now I can group, I'm not gonna miss so much. By the time that this dragon is down, the minions are gonna be around here. I can just base, run back, and catch everything at the top lane tower. So this is like the perfect scenario where you should group, where it's very, very clear. Dragon Soul is their only win condition. You've got time. Why not just go to the dragon and group here? Thank you, Jamarius, for the prime, by the way. So, this is a very simple example and the most clear-cut example that I can give you of when you should just be grouping for the dragon. If we had the 2 dragons, I would have also done the same. Because at some point, like, Ocean Soul is or Infernal Soul is always going to be more important than your individual lead. At the end of the day, the reason why I tell you to be so selfish and to play for yourself. This is my subscriber notification, by the way. The reason why I tell you that is so that eventually you group. Eventually, when you're level 15, 16, you're strong, you have items, you set the other top laner behind, you took enemy camps, you will group. At the end of the day, it is a team game. Because then Baron is up, then you've got level 16 shrooms, you can set up objectives. But before that, a lot of the time just random ass bullshit is gonna happen. And you don't need to join all of the random ass bullshit. Of course, in high elo, I might need to do it more because there's a very specific reason that I'm doing something. But in general, I just play super for myself when I'm in lower elo, and I think that is the optimal gameplay because then you get an ADCS lead with 3 levels up where you're super strong. And once you're stronger than you should be because you were so much in the side lane, then you can negate the technical weakness of Teemo in the mid game and you can win fights just because you are ahead. So that's what I meant with at the very beginning. You want to put yourself ahead, and once you are, I guess a good metaphor is the oxygen mask. The oxygen mask at an airplane. They always tell you first put the oxygen mask on yourself and then on the children. The League of Legends is the exact same thing. You first put your oxygen mask on so that you don't die, so that you're strong, and once you're strong, you've got oxygen, you've got CS, then you just put the oxygen mask on your team and you help your team and you win. And yeah, sometimes there's no oxygen. Sometimes the child next to you cut the oxygen mask supply lines. There's no oxygen. And then you just die and the airplane crashes or it doesn't, but you just die because you don't get any oxygen. And that happens. Sometimes you lose games, okay? Sometimes the children sabotages you and sometimes the children deserves to die. But in the case that there is some oxygen and there is some hope, then make sure that you're strong yourself and then you do it for your teammates. So I want to leave this whole talk with one message, which is grouping. Whether you should group or split push is always gonna adapt based on many factors that I just said. But in the side lane, you are guaranteed to get stronger. You're guaranteed to get advantages as long as you don't die. When you group, your team might get stronger, you might get objectives, but it's not guaranteed. And if you want to climb, you want consistent results. And consistent results are only applicable in side lane because you can't mind control your 4 teammates to do the right thing when you group. So in my opinion, stay in the side lane, get strong, and then win. So that would be all of it today. I hope you enjoyed my minor improvements with the PowerPoint design. I will try to get more specific clips in the future. you can send, again, this gets better if you help me out. So if you send me clips of why didn't I do that here, or if you tell me, yo, what should I have done here, and I can use that in the next episode and we can talk about that and learn from that. But I will try to make maybe a weekly highlight recap of the last few weeks, but again, it takes time. I'll try to do it if I can. I hope that you enjoyed.
Never underestimate the power of the Scouts code. 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 2, 3, Scouts code. Code. 2, 3, 4. Yes, sir.